So I talked to my parents and I was like, I want to leave. Like, this is just not it. I think I have a year. I was like, I want to try to do something in this year. Because the advice I got consistently was anytime you can get a job, like real life work, that's more valuable than a degree. Because a degree is great and it'll teach you a lot, but on the job learning is really what you're going to get the most from. They're like, okay, we'll give you a year, but if you don't get in, like you should go back to medicine. I was like, that's reasonable, like compromise, like let's see how it goes. And I started talking to just everybody. I talked to people in banking, consulting, pharma, medical science liaisons, physicians, like anybody who would speak to me. I think I submitted like, I don't know, 75 to 100 job applications and went nowhere. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm stuck, fine. Like I'll go back to school, no problem. And then mid-August, so this was like 6 weeks before I was about to start, my dad's like, have you heard of venture capital? I was like, what is a venture capital? Like, I do not know what that is because I was in medicine my entire life. And the only idea I had of venture capital was the show Silicon Valley. So I don't know if you know the
It's
HBO
a pretty
one.
accurate lens on the world.
It really is. In technology, absolutely.
Stupidity.
Yeah, exactly. 2 weeks later, I jumped on a plane and moved to the Netherlands. Which was a crazy change of events in life, for sure.
And so you were interning.
I was interning at a place called M Ventures, so it's called Merck Ventures. It's the corporate VC of Merck, so very large pharma company. Yeah, big pharma.
Founded in 2017, StartWell is Toronto's independent hub for innovators to collaborate. Our podcasts relate perspectives from the world's most diverse urban population to reflect unique insights into global business, media, and culture. Anish Kaushal, Dr. Anish Kaushal, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really great studio.
It's a
setup.
Thank you very much. Yeah. We're pros at StartWell, so
I love that.
the place is ready to rock.
Always.
But yeah, I'm excited to talk to you because we bumped into each other, of course. For our listeners, how we met was to do with an event, actually at an event that my wife told me to get out of the house and go to.
Yeah.
And
Halo Health.
Yeah. So that's where we met because my wife's a family doctor, interested in all sorts of, evolutions that will help the healthcare system in Canada, at least, get better, if that's possible.
Ideally, yeah.
Hopefully.
That's what we're all doing.
And so tell me a little bit about that part of your life, about, the medical side. You are a doctor.
I am a
What kind of
doctor.
doctor are you?
So I am not well, it's funny because
Don't tell me you're a dentist, man.
I'm not a dentist. I am a real doctor. I did go to medical school, but I am not a specific doctor. So what happened for me was went to medical school, spent 6 years there, finished it. And then before going to residency and choosing a path of, family medicine or internal or dermatology or whatever, I left and I moved into the venture world. And so that was 5 years ago now, originally working for a company in Amsterdam. So spent a little time there,
Wow.
Which is really cool. And then worked for a corporate VC of a large pharma company, one of the largest in the world. So that was really awesome. And so, yeah, I ended up kind of avoiding all the residency and continuing down certain paths. All my friends are still physicians. My brother's a family doctor. My best friend's a radiologist. Have friends that are families and internal and pathology and ophthalmology and all of that. And I just decided to do something different. And that's how we end up here.
How did you, well, firstly, where'd you go to school for medicine?
I went to the University of St. Andrews and the University of Edinburgh in Scotland.
Wow. And you're from where, Toronto?
Toronto. Yeah, I'm from Richmond Hill.
So congratulations.
Thank you. It was a few years ago, but thank you.
What was the impetus for going to Scotland?
A few reasons. One of them at the time was medicine in the UK is actually an undergraduate degree. So you can go directly out of high school.
Oh, wow.
You're
Doogie Howser.
It's a lot of people
who didn't practice.
Who didn't practice, yeah. I've heard that a few times for sure. So yeah, I was really young, and essentially what happened was I was in high school. I was always one of those science kids, good at science and math. That's what I thought I was going to do. And then actually in grade 11, I took economics for the first time and was really like, wow, what the hell is this? This is really cool. And so after that, or when I was applying to university, I applied to sort of a bunch of business programs, a bunch of science programs all over Canada. But then I also applied elsewhere. So I took the SATs, applied to the US, I applied to schools in Ireland, I applied to schools in the UK. And I think a lot of that comes from my parents, especially my dad. He kind of works in the healthcare finance industry as well, but his motto was always education, particularly education abroad. And if you can get at really high quality universities, his belief was that the cost of sending you and the experience that you'll get while there is worth it. And very grateful, touch wood, to have that and have that role model kind of in my life. And so he was very, kind of
you
like...
can touch the wood. It'll make noise, but that's fine.
Okay, yeah, no, I just want to make sure. You got to touch wood. So I was very fortunate that he was like, him and my mom were supportive of me, like trying to apply and do all these things. So I think I applied to like 40 or 50 programs by the time I was in high school. I was applying to everything,
Wow.
doing a lot, all the exams, tests, resume stuff. And then, yeah, the reason that the program actually came up was, so it was a brand new program at the
Mhm.
time. It was specifically geared towards Canadians. And the idea was that it would take Canadians out of high school, train them in the UK. So you spend 6 years at two of the top universities in the world. And then through that, you also do clinical electives in Canada. So I spent a summer in Edmonton. I spent 4 months there doing electives.
Glorious, beautiful Edmonton.
Yeah, we called it Dedmonton.
Yeah, oh my
Yeah,
God. I
exactly.
was born in
So,
Dedmonton.
were you? Okay,
I
didn't
got out
know.
of there when I was 6.
Good.
It was-
Probably, yeah. Probably a good thing in the end. It's, I mean, touch wood, we're very lucky we spent time in the summer. I didn't live there in the winter. But yeah, I had a great time. I was really happy with it. But
Right.
yeah, anyway, through that program, spent some time in Canada. And the idea being of the program was to get people back to residency jobs here. So essentially, the Canadian system, as you may know, is, you do undergraduate, you do your MCATs, you interview, hopefully you get into medicine, but obviously it's super competitive and really hard. And then once you get in, you decide kind of what you want to do. So for me, the choice was I would avoid all of the stuff I had to do on the getting into medicine side in Canada. But then the big struggle was sort of getting a job,
Right.
because you're applying as an international. So that was the sort of, sacrifice I guess I kind of made. But it worked out. I ended up here.
So, okay, wait, so Glasgow and where else were you?
Edinburgh and St.
Edinburgh,
Andrews.
sorry.
Yes, Edinburgh and the University of St. Andrews.
Where is that?
So it's an hour outside of Edinburgh. It's
Ah.
The home of golf. I don't know if you're a golfer yourself.
Okay,
but
right. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
There's a movie that came out about this.
Chariots of
recently.
Fire was filmed there a long
Okay.
time ago. And then also the thing that it's known for is Will and Kate. So Princess
Mhm.
Princess Kate and William, they both went to St. Andrews and met there.
That's
So
wonderful.
it's a very posh university in the middle of nowhere in Scotland.
Crazy.
But it was amazing. Yeah.
Man. And so, are you like scared straight? Will you ever deep fry a Mars bar ever again?
Probably not. It's very tasty, but
Wait, that is a thing. It's a real
Oh,
thing.
yeah, for sure. It's a diabetes on a stick,
There you
100%.
go.
We got it I remember my first one was like second year at a chip shop, and it was like on a night out, and like we just passed it, and it was like, oh, deep fried Mars bar. I was like, oh, I've never heard of that. And
Yeah.
you have one bite, and you're like, this is really good, but also like this is so much sugar.
Yeah,
Like,
I
just
can't keep
believe
eating
this.
this.
Yeah. How did you hear about that? I'm always curious.
I don't know,
Uh,
man.
Yeah.
It's
Have you
just
had
kind of
deep fried
like
Mars
the
bar?
word on the street is
Word-
that,
Gotta get it. Huh?
Scotland, it's like
Yeah.
Scotch and
Scotch,
deep
yeah.
fried everything. Pickles,
Yep.
apparently.
Yep.
And, like,
And then obviously
butter and
haggis.
stuff.
I'm sure you've
Haggis.
heard of that.
Oh,
That's
lovely
like,
haggis.
yeah, I did not enjoy that particularly, but yeah,
acquired
haggis is, like,
taste.
very
6
acquired.
more years,
Maybe.
you would have had that
I think I would've.
hankering for haggis every Thursday night.
I would have absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so when you left there
Yep.
and you were looking for gigs, you were
Yep.
thinking of what to do next.
Yep.
Why this kind of jump into VC stuff?
So it wasn't by design. And that's the thing I always tell people is my life has been a lot of luck and circumstances and the right timing, the right place, the right time. Essentially the MO or what happened was I was in my final year, I was studying for finals, and I was just not happy with it. I was just like, you're studying all of medicine, you have to learn so much to do it. And I was just like, is this really going to be the rest of my life? Like always studying, always doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that time I started having conversations with my dad and he was like, you don't have to stay involved. And again, I attribute a lot of, again, luck. Like, I just was very fortunate. I had a role model in my life who was like, you're not stuck in medicine. You could do something else, which I think for a lot of people, especially physicians, you don't really know that, right? Like you think life is very one track minded.
Dude, it takes
You have to-
people 20 years in
Yeah.
medicine to figure out, like,
they
hey, wait, what? I can stop for a minute,
Yeah.
And then what? Who am I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And people never really ask themselves a question because I think you're always on the treadmill and you start really young. I mean, I was on it for until I left.
Right.
And I don't think people ever get off sometimes. And they never really realize. And so for me, again, the timing and rationale was essentially, he was like, okay, also at this time while I was studying for finals, I was applying for Canadian residency programs.
Okay.
And at the time, there was 2 exams that you had to take. So one of them was a multiple choice exam, and then one of them was a clinical exam, so like an OSCE. And the clinical exam, I did really well, like, had top marks. But the multiple choice exam, unfortunately, at the time, I was given wrong information by one of my advisors who set up the program that all you had to do for that program was pass. It turns out that's not the case. It turns out you have to do really well. And so the issue what happened was there was essentially a threshold mark in order for you to apply to medicine.
It's never good advice when someone
Never.
says oh yeah, the bottom
is enough.
The bottom bar is what
Yeah.
you want to aim for.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, I don't know if it would have changed how I did stuff or whatever. I mean, I'm not blaming him. It was on me. But at the
Right.
same time, what happened was there was a threshold. There was a pass mark, which is about 250. The threshold mark to apply for any program was 325. And I ended up right in the middle, at like 276. And the issue at that time was you couldn't retake the exam. So you were
For like
stuck.
another year or whatever.
Yeah, for another year, a couple years.
Yeah.
And so you were stuck. And so the problem was for all of the applying to medicine at the time, the first thing they looked at was that score. It was nothing else. And so I had done 6 years of observerships, worked. I had 5 papers as first author published in a variety of journals. By the time I graduated, I spent every summer working. I was like ready to I was committed to do it, to becoming a doctor.
Wow.
And because of one test, everything disappeared. And again, I'm very grateful for it now, looking
Yeah.
back, because it ended up here, and I'm the happiest I've ever been. But at the time, it was very like, you go through a lot, because especially, I mean, the time of like when I found out, and I had friends who had applied and got in and interviews and doing all of that, and you're sitting there like, I have nothing.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm graduating, and then also at the same time was through a variety of circumstances with our program, they didn't allow us to stay in the UK, so I couldn't stay there to do residency there either for a year. So I essentially had a year off to
Yeah.
like figure out what I wanted to do.
Forced leave.
Forced leave. And it turned out into the best thing ever, because for me, that was like, okay, I
So
talked
what
to my
happened?
parents. Yeah, so I talked to my parents and I was like, I want to leave. Like, this is just not it. I think I have a year. I was like, I want to try to do something in this year.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, okay, we'll give you a year, but if you don't get in, like, you should go back to medicine. I was like, that's reasonable, like compromise. Like, oh, let's see how it goes. So essentially, I started reaching out to people, networks, through my parents, through people that I met. I cold emailed, and I started talking to just everybody. I talked to people in banking, consulting, pharma, medical science liaisons, physicians, like anybody who would speak to me, of just like, what should I do? What, this is my path, this is what I'm doing. So at the time, I was originally, actually, my goal was actually consulting and banking. So I ended up interviewing with a firm called Jefferies in New York, and also a consulting firm in London called LEK.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to final round interviews and then didn't get in. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And so at the time, I actually was talking to a couple of friends of mine from undergraduate, and they told me, one of them told me about this program in London. It was a 1-year master's, and it was in drug discovery and pharma management. So basically, the idea was like to learn about the pharma industry and how it works,
Cool.
and people could get jobs out of it. So she did the program, got a job out of it. I went down to London, so I was still in the UK at the time. Met the program director, and they're like, yeah, like your profile, like nobody has it, because it's a master's. Like, so it was mostly
So,
people who were doing undergrad.
so you went straight
to-
into med school, then you went
Yeah.
straight into a master's.
No, hold on. That was the
Ah.
plan. That was the plan.
Okay.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
So
Doogie hit a.
Do you hit a
Doogie
different
hit a
thing?
wall.
Do you hit a wall? Yeah. Well, wall or just luck. So that was the plan. That was the goal. And then I applied, got into the program, and this was like till June 2018, July. But my program didn't start till October, like for early October, like late September, early October. So the entire summer, I was still applying to jobs, reaching out to people, because the advice I got consistently was, anytime you can get a job, like real life work, that's more valuable than a degree. Because a degree is great and it'll teach you a lot, but on the job learning is really what you're gonna get the most from. So anyway, I applied to all these consulting, banking. I think I submitted like, I don't know, 75 to 100 job applications and went nowhere. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm stuck. Fine. Like, I'll go back to school, no problem. And then mid-August, so this was like 6 weeks before I was about to start, my dad's like, have you heard of venture capital? I was like, what is a venture capital? Like, I do not know what that is, because I was in medicine my entire life. And the only idea I had of venture capital was the show Silicon Valley. So I don't know if you know the
It's a
HBO
pretty
one.
accurate lens on the world.
It really
of,
is. In technology,
of
absolutely.
Stupidity
I was-
and finance.
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Oh.
But I didn't think it was, I thought it was only tech. Like, I didn't think it was healthcare, right? And I thought it was only like California or the US. Like, and my dad's like, no, like they have international firms all over the world that invest the same venture, but also in healthcare, like in biotech and medtech and digital health. I was like, oh, I didn't know that.
Mhm.
And so basically, there was one Sunday in August, I looked up the top 75 VC firms in healthcare around the world, and I just cold emailed them. And I said, hey, my name's Anish. I just graduated medicine. I'd love to talk to you if you're open to it. And as you can imagine, a lot of people don't respond, because that's the way the world works.
Yeah.
But a few people got on the phone, and some people wrote me emails. Some people spoke to me. Like, I remember one guy, he was like in San Diego. He's like a partner at like McKesson Ventures or something. And he did his PhD at the University of Dundee, which was like 10 minutes from St. Andrews. So the only reason he talked to me was because he's like, oh, Scotland. Like, I remember I used to live
Right.
there. I was Scottish. And
Yeah.
and that was
Deep-fried Mars bars.
exactly, do you find Mars bars? And so that was really grateful. And then one firm came back and said, hey, we actually have an internship program. Are you interested? And what's crazy is it wasn't advertised at the time. So I didn't know it existed. It was like
Cool.
totally a shot in the dark. And so I was like, yeah, in my head, I was like, absolutely. But at the same time, like, I'd been rejected from, I don't know, 100 plus things at this point. I was like, there's no way I'm going to get it. Like, impossible.
Mhm.
And so I interviewed with them. It was the 3 rounds of interviews. And then 2 days before I was about to move to London for this program, like, I was, setting up my house. I was going to live with a friend. I was like, getting bank account and phone and all that stuff ready for London. They're like, yeah, we really like you. We'll see you in Amsterdam. So, 2 weeks later, I jumped on a plane and moved to the Netherlands.
Man.
Which was a crazy change of events in life, for sure.
And so you were interning.
I was interning at a place called M Ventures. So it's called Merck Ventures. It's the corporate VC of Merck. So very
Big
large pharma
pharma.
company. Yeah, big pharma. So I was on their therapeutics team, which is about 250 million US of the 500 at the time. And they were investing primarily for Merck's related areas.
So that number was what? Their fund size?
Fund size, yeah. The total fund size was 500 million.
That's greenfield, or that's like
Evergreen.
an annual commitment? Yeah,
Evergreen
Evergreen.
fund.
That's the word.
Evergreen, exactly.
Not
That's the word.
greenfield.
Basically the same thing.
Okay, there we go.
Basically, capital just constantly gets recycled. But they'd been around for about 10 years, and they did really well in the therapeutics team. But they had like 4 divisions. So they had a therapeutics department, life sciences department, materials department, and the
Cool.
tools department. And so I interned for the therapeutics team, which was the biggest and sort of largest team at that time. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Was living in Amsterdam everything that, one could
People-
imagine?
It was. I would actually say a lot nicer and more chill, because I think
Right.
people from the
It's
West
very
think of it.
chill.
It's very chill.
It's so
People
relaxed.
from the West, people from the West think of like, you always think of coffee shops or the red light district, and like that's not it when you're there.
Mhm.
Like it's very clean, it's very pretty. The summer times are unbelievable. It's super easy to get around. Everybody bikes. Like, there's a very famous thing. There's like more bikes than people in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Like there's literally bikes everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's super, and it's just like very historical. Like a lot of really cool museums. The parks are beautiful. So yeah, I had a really great time. I was unfortunate just timing because I was there over winter. So it's like, I mean, we lived in Canada, so it was a little bit better than that.
Mhm.
But yeah, the summertime and just like the ability and access to like the rest of Europe and being able to travel and have friends come visit, like it was awesome. Really, really
So-
enjoyed that.
What was it like interning at this internal pharmaceutical VC?
Mm.
And also,
Yeah.
with that, you're in Amsterdam, but I'm
Yeah.
sure there's deals all over the world that they're looking at.
Yes, so they were predominantly focused on Europe and the US. We never got to travel for that stuff because I was intern at the time. But you talk to companies obviously everywhere, and so yeah, it was amazing. It was like really
You just had to go to the coffee shop to get the spliffs for,
before work.
managing director.
Yeah, managing director. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, people never really talked about it in the office. But anyway, that's a different conversation for another time. But no, it was really, I think, eye opening, because for me, I think I came from the medicine background, right, clinical,
right.
and all the stuff that we did was very early stage science. So it was a lot of like reading papers, reading research, talking to professors, talking to people that like literally just starting companies. And I come from the far end of that, right? Because if you think about the way science works, is like you start in a lab, you do basic science, then you do translational, then you get to clinical medicine, and then you get to physicians because they're actually prescribing it. So I came from the other side, right? And so I was like learning on the fly, because also like I didn't go to school for this. Like I had no background. Like basically the first couple months, touch wood, I'm very grateful that like I had a research background.
Yeah.
And so like that was helpful in me like understanding and picking up papers. But that first like couple months, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing anytime. Which I think a lot of people feel at different stages of life, doing different things. But I was, again, very grateful. Really good team.
But that's
really cool
wicked.
people.
That
Yeah.
feeling of kind of like not knowing what you're doing,
Yeah.
but being in a position where like you're fairly comfortable to be able to figure it out,
Yes.
it's kind of awesome.
Oh yeah. And I think to your point, that was an experience that like I think gave me the confidence to be like, if you go into a new area, it's like you're supposed to not know, because everybody when they start, they don't know anything. Like when you started this and when you're doing anything like that, when I started, writing and doing venture and doing
Every
like,
single
everything.
day.
Every single day. You're
I
just like, I don't know how
tell-
to do it.
Yeah, like I don't even have an alarm clock,
Yeah.
Like I wake up and I do
Figure it
stuff.
out. Exactly.
Make a list every day and
Yeah.
I gotta get stuff done.
Is that done? Yeah. Well, I mean, you were telling me about like, the LED thing you had in the background. And to your point, that's just like you see a problem that somebody talks to you about and you're like, I think I can do something about that. And like, let me see if I can figure it out. And I think for me, that experience was like cemented that we do have the ability to figure it out. And then I think if you stick with something and you're resilient, you ask questions. I think also if you're around really good people, and I think
Mhm.
that really matters, like especially people that are like willing to teach you, willing to like, help you go through that process. Like that's a big thing. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people sometimes don't have like, the mentors or the people next to them, like friends even, to say like, yeah, you're doing a good job, right? Because I think there's so many times where we're in our own heads, we don't think we're doing anything great. Like we're always comparing ourselves to somebody else. And
I have this
yeah.
great thing. I learned this a long time ago about myself that like I know when to stop. When I'm building something, something new. I know that I've done enough when I look at it and I think, is this awesome or is this a piece of shit?
Right.
And I don't know the difference. Then
Right.
at that point, I'm like, I'm done.
I'm done.
It's
I got out.
built. It's great. It's
Yeah.
probably amazing.
Yeah.
But I can't tell anymore.
Well, I was gonna say, so how do you? Is that like in conversations with other people that you then figure out which one that is and whether you should continue or not, or is that more a personal like?
Honestly,
decision?
it's never shit. to
No,
me.
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you
Um,
guys did a long time.
no, but
So
yeah, it's always people around me, and it's
yeah,
definitely that's a whole like can of worms to take this conversation down, or a rabbit
no,
hole.
it's okay. I was just
But
kind of curious. Yeah,
it's a great point, and it's definitely a subject of a vlog that I have cooking on entrepreneurship. I'm
yeah,
starting this thing called Entrepreneurship 101,
cool. I
and
like
it's
that.
literally just little snippets
Yep,
of lessons from the field for
awesome.
new entrepreneurs.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to give the investor side if anybody ever wants to
Cool,
think. So yeah,
cool,
we
cool,
could do that
cool.
another time. But
Yeah,
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 we'll
yeah,
have you on the vlog.
absolutely. Yeah,
But yeah, so like my thoughts on this are very much that like you want to you y- you want to be very careful, I think, going into entrepreneurship
hmm
with seeking soundboards,
yes,
because if you
thousand
can't
percent.
accurately kind of receive feedback,
Yep,
parse through the lens of assessing the worthiness of perspective you're receiving,
yep,
then you won't learn anything.
absolutely.
And a
Yeah,
lot of entrepreneurs fail, especially in technology,
hmm
because they, sorry to say this
yeah,
bluntly, take the advice of
I
investors,
agree,
but
thousand
not
percent.
not
Yeah,
and assuming that that's someone that's within their company, that's
yeah,
someone that understands their perspective, that's someone that like is looking through their eyes.
yeah.
Even your employees will not be
No,
able to see everything you see every day.
no, not at all. Well, I think also
So,
it's to your point. It's I think the feedback portion. You're so right. I think like for me, one of the things I've read about is like you should never take advice from someone you don't want to be or you don't value, or someone who's not done the thing you're trying to do. Right. And I
yeah,
think investors sometimes, I mean, I look at many different things every day, but like I've never built a real company doing that thing. And I think also the other feedback is really the feedback should not come from investors, it should come from customers.
right.
Like those are the people that you're solving. And to me, it's always, and I think this articulation as a VC, I mean, I talk about a lot with people that we advise and people that come to me is
Hmm.
the articulation of the problem
Yeah,
and the articulation of why your solution is the best reason for that problem. And figuring that part out and articulating that and communicating that is so important because that's recruiting, that's talking to people, that's talking to me
mm,
and you, that's pitching, that's doing all of that. And I think a lot of
yeah.
people kind of fall short is like, why is this a problem? And why is this the best solution?
Yeah, and also, for the VC talk, I think there's something interesting there, which I always tell people is in a non super capital intensive business.
Mhm.
So, like, if you don't need a ton of money
Yeah.
just to prove a
Yeah.
hypothesis,
Don't
build
take
it.
it.
Well, no, I
Yeah.
would say, yeah, build it, sell it. You
Yeah.
take it if it can help
Yeah.
the outcome for the business,
Yeah.
and you can manage the cap table,
hmm
and that makes sense for your future.
Yep.
But businesses need to be designed to be
Yeah.
sustainable
Yeah.
before you take capital,
Yes.
or in situ with taking capital. It
Yeah.
has to be sustainable because
Yeah.
I look at it also as a very interesting thing, but like so many entrepreneurs who take venture capital for early stage
Yep.
get on the funding track
Yep.
of thinking that now their destiny is locked into an IPO or an
Yeah.
M&A
Yep.
that's after Series D or
D.
something.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's like, you're stupid. You don't
Yeah, I
need
agree.
every
I
single
agree.
business doesn't need to be
Yeah.
pumped with
No, it
capital.
doesn't. In fact, you shouldn't do it unless you absolutely have to. And also,
Yeah.
unless you think you can get a 10 to 15x outcome for your investors, it's probably not.
And at the
It's
same
not worth it.
time,
Yeah.
so many investments get made
Oh, yeah.
as throw it in the trash investments,
Mm.
that like the people who are being invested in as that 90% failure rate
Yeah.
don't look at their own destiny as a failure
Yeah.
potential.
Of course.
So they should take a step back off in
Yeah.
cases and say, well, okay, I locked in a bunch of investment. Now, how long can I ride that out?
Yeah.
Why
What's your
do I
runway?
need to fulfill my investor's mandate
Yeah.
for my investment?
Yeah.
Because I'm running a company. They're just buying some
They're
equity
just,
in it.
yeah. Yeah. Well, it's also to your point, it's also, I mean, there's a lot of things to be said about like, runway, milestones, like hitting on specific things. And to your point, I think the other thing that, again, I find this shift, like, I think we're fundamentally going through a different change right now. I mean, we were talking a bit about macro before and kind of where we are. And I think the issue, not the issue, but I think entrepreneurs the last sort of 15 years have grown up in a QE low rate environment where money was always free and
Hmm.
available and you could always get it. And that has fundamentally changed.
Hmm.
And so money is not free and available, and the cost of capital is high, and your hurdle rate now is even higher, especially to your point from capital intensive businesses.
Hmm.
And so anytime you take on new money, you got to make sure you're really really, performing and really getting somewhere. Because I think a lot of people could just dilute and dilute and raise and raise. And somebody out there was a series, the SoftBanks of the world would always have money and they're always around and they could always,
Yeah, didn't
propel you.
WeWork go bankrupt
Yeah,
yesterday?
yeah, 47 billion to zero. And yeah, so I think that's the thing that's changed, especially, I mean, like, there's different type, like, for example, the biotech business that we do, you need capital. Fundamentally, like, in order to get a drug to market,
Right.
you need a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's different than, selling a software to, customers around the world. Like, really, at the end of the day is execution. And I think also it's sustainability, like something like you thought, right? I
Mhm.
think people for a long time, investors prioritize growth.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody always heard is grow, market, sales, spend, just spend. And now to me, it's sustainability. It's like profitability and it's like, can you grow sustainably? I mean, yeah, sometimes you need extra capital to grow if you see product market fit and you want to scale and, you have to fulfill a lot of what you're doing. Absolutely. But like, don't overreach for that
Right.
because next round of financing may not come. And then what? Right. And we've seen that. I mean, business, like there's another business I saw, I think it was called Olive Health or something like that. They raised, I think, $800 million. I mean, we saw this in our thing, valued at like 4 or 5 billion, and it's gone to zero, right? And that's a lot of money that's gone, right? And
Yeah.
and so that's the other thing too, is just like, especially as an entrepreneur, like the prioritization should be sustainability, profitability, finding customers, getting feedback, iterating, and building a real business, not just a venture backed,
So easy to spend money.
so easy.
It's so easy to spend money. It's very difficult to make money. And
Yeah.
also, I look at it like this, to be committed to making money.
Yeah.
Like most venture-backed companies are not committed culturally to making money.
No,
And
no.
there's a nuance to this because, and I always say that again, my benchmark for a pain threshold of an entrepreneur is whether they could bootstrap a company.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not about the ingenuity involved in creating a product and service.
Yeah.
It's literally about the grind
Yeah. The grind and
of
resilience.
not just
Yeah.
being in the soup operating,
Yeah.
but committing to the career of solving problems
Yep.
daily and being in something.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to talk about there for
Yeah.
sure. But so on the other side of the table, on the investor side,
Yep.
what was the evolution out of this? Because you were at Merck, you
At
said,
Merck?
for
Yep.
a year?
No, about 7 months. So it was a 6 month
Okay.
internship, and then I took some time off just to travel.
Yeah.
And so then after that was so basically the story was that it was because it was an internship. I found out 3 months in that I wasn't going to stick around. Like they didn't have an opportunity for me to have a full time job.
Yeah.
So at that point, I talked to my parents, and they were again, in the back, it was like if you don't get a job at the end of a year, you have to go back to medicine. And in my head, there was just no way I was going back to medicine, like impossible. Because to me, it was the first month. I'll never forget it. It was like November, early November, and I woke up one day before my alarm,
Mhm.
and I was like excited to go to work. I was like, I can't wait to get to work to try and learn something. And I never ever felt that in medicine ever. And so to me, I was like, well, that's a sign that
Mhm.
obviously this is really interesting. So this venture thing, I was like, this is really cool. So basically, after the 3 months, I reached out to probably 100 VCs around the world, cold emailed, networked, LinkedIn, contact, asked for, show up to conferences, anything, just to talk to them, to see advice, to ask about opportunity, to see where they would go. And a lot of them I'm still in touch with today, which is great. That has, helped my career down the road. But then I ended up getting to a place where I had 3 final round interviews with 3 firms around the world. So one was with a firm in San Francisco,
Mhm.
one was with a firm in Germany, and then one was with a firm in Canada called Amplitude. And so I had been gone from Canada for 7 years, and they were starting from scratch, and they wanted to build something really big here. And so I was like, you know what? Like my skill set was obviously differentiated. It's very rare that you find a doctor with venture experience, especially internationally. And so I, decided to join, and that's when I actually moved to Montreal. So I lived there for almost a year before COVID,
Right.
and then COVID shut down the world. So I ended up moving home to my parents' house, and then in Toronto. So that's how I kind of got into to where I am now.
So tell us, okay, so the event that I met you at in the
Yep.
beginning
Halo
was an
Health.
Amplitude
It was
event,
Halo
right?
Health event.
Halo Health.
Halo
Okay.
Health,
So
yes.
break it down for me.
Yeah.
Who's who?
So Amplitude, we're a large venture fund that we do sort of like we're now on our second fund. We're managing almost $500 million, investing in biotech, medtech, and health tech. Halo Health is a sort of a smaller fund, but they're almost like an angel group of investors.
Okay.
And so what they do, their sort of differentiation is all of their members are doctors. So that's imagine why your wife got in touch or why
Right.
you've think.
Right.
And so a lot of people that are there are actual physicians. So like understand the problems, are working day to day. And so this is all the Halo Health people are kind of doing it on the side. So it's physicians that are practicing, some have practiced for a long time, and kind of want to help and do other things or see how they can leverage and benefit from that. So Luke is a friend of mine, and met him as well,
Mhm.
and now based in Calgary. So he started that many years ago. I really wanted to grow and scale it. Now he's built a team, and they have a lot more they're accessing a lot more doctors all over the country. And it's really helpful because if you're a company, like if I'm a medical device or digital health company and I can get a doctor on my cap table
Right.
who knows my product, knows the problem, can help me and advise me on directions, especially as a technologist. Because I find sometimes, especially in the especially in the digital health world, you have a lot of tech people being like, oh, I can solve healthcare. It's so easy. And that is not the case, as I've seen for many years. It's hard. It's difficult. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of nitty gritty that unless you're working day to day in the system, you don't really appreciate. So, having people like that on around the table is really helpful. So
Sure.
anyway, that's how Halo Health, I got in touch with them a few years ago during COVID. Always kept in touch with Luke. And so that's how we ended up meeting at the event, because I think they hosted something around one of the
Yeah.
conferences we were at. And that's how we got in touch.
So Amplitude
Yeah.
is where you are.
Yeah.
And who is Amplitude? Like it's a
So we are a spin out of the BDC. So people may have heard of the BDC.
oh.
So our
For
partners.
for our non-Canadian listeners
Yep.
and viewers, the BDC is the Business Development Bank of Canada, a very unique institution that is a parastatal of some degree.
Mhm.
So organization kind of funded by and owned by the government.
Yep. Crown Corp.
They do a bunch of stuff. A lot of it is debt.
Yep.
For all sorts of
Small
entrepreneurs,
businesses,
small
entrepreneurs. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
I didn't. Maybe I did know this, but I forgot.
Yeah, so essentially, our partners who started the firm, Dion and JF, and then two other folks, Barat and Allison, they were at the BDC running their former healthcare fund. And then they essentially had a big exit. One of the companies they started actually got acquired for over $1 billion, called Clementia Pharmaceuticals. And so because of that, they then wanted to spin out and sort of start their own fund outside of the BDC. Because as you can imagine, at Crown Corporation, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of stuff you have to deal with, a lot of things that, can restrict sort of the vision that they had. And so they ended up spinning out and started, raising money. And so that's when I got hired, and myself and two other members of our team as early employees. So this was back 2019, and I was hired before we even raised any money. And then we raised the first fund, which ended up being 200 million Canadian, which at the time was the largest initial fund ever in Canadian history in biotech. And then the second fund we've been raising for the last year and a half to 2 years, and is going to be 200 million US. And it's really cool because I think it's a testament to what we're trying to build in Canada and what we're trying to show. And yeah, it's been super exciting to kind of be a part of the ride.
So the fund primarily invests in Canadian opportunities.
Primarily, yes. We do invest outside too. So we invest in the US, we have investments in Europe as well, but most of our capital is allocated to Canadian companies.
Let's break this down for anyone interested in venture capital, how it works.
Yep.
Because also it's interesting talking to someone who had to learn it to do it
Yep.
and has learned it just in the last few years.
Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned that investment from the BDC
Yep.
yielding
Yep.
and these guys going off spinning off their own thing.
Yep.
So if you're a VC working for an employee of a venture capital fund,
Yep.
writing checks into companies.
Yep.
If those companies that you write checks into have an exit
Yep.
and the fund wins on their investment,
Yep.
how does that get dispersed into people's pockets as employees?
So it's decided usually by the manager, so
As a
by
bonus.
the GP as a bonus. And it depends on what's called an LPA, so it's called a limited partner agreement. Essentially, that's the agreement that we have with our investors. So, for example, let's say I'm a GP managing a fund, and you're my investor. So we, negotiate what the terms of our fund is,
Right.
and then we decide. So, for example, if we have a big win, us as the GP make the decision, also with advising our investors and talking to a lot of people and seeing whether we return the money or whether we can also sometimes recycle capital. So for example, when we had an early exit on one of our initial companies in Fund 1, the decision was made because it was so early in the fund cycle, because usually funds last 7
5
to 10.
to 7.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
7 to
7 to
10.
10.
Yeah, 7 to 10. Because they last a long time, and this was very early in the win, we recycled the capital. So therefore, you could put into, higher performing companies. You could, ideally add more returns longer term. So that's a decision made by the GP, and it's negotiated with the investors.
Right.
So it really depends. Yeah.
Okay, but typically the industry standard is this 2 and 20 model,
Yep.
right? So 2% of whatever you raise as a fund from your LP or your investors
Is fees.
is fees. So
Yep.
you can kind of pay people's salary and rent and stuff off of that.
Yep, exactly.
Somehow.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and then the 20% is your share of the wins.
Yep, exactly.
And then
So if you have, let's say, for argument's sake, you raise a $10 fund and you have $100 that gets dispersed, that's a great fund. That's an unbelievable fund. That very unlikely to happen.
Right.
But let's say, for argument's sake, you get 100. So $80 of those goes back to investors. So they made an 8x on their initial $10 investment.
Mhm.
And then the GP, which is the partner that started it, they make the $20 out of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, the BDC people who founded this fund had a little bit of a payday?
They
Or
did.
it was
They had
like-
an exit. They had a big
Okay.
exit. So a company that they started called Clementia Pharmaceuticals. At the time, it was one of the largest acquisitions of a Canadian biotech company in history. It was acquired for $1.3 billion, and they were the first check. So as you can imagine, that did really well. And so because they had the exit on that side, then they eventually got to spin, they were able to spin out, and then BDC was what's called an anchor LP.
Mhm.
So they put the largest check initially into the first fund.
Which typically happens in every LP or every fund in Canada, right?
The large check, or you mean the BDC being allocated?
BDC.
Yeah, BDC is an investor in a lot of funds. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then did they move their health investment business over to this fund?
Yeah. So BDC doesn't have a healthcare business anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
And
they
that's a
sort of
long-term arrangement?
well, yeah. I mean, there's no idea to go back. There's still the people that were on the old BDC team are still managing some of the portfolio because the portfolio didn't
Right.
necessarily disappear. So they're still managing some parts of that. So they're still in touch with the BDC and still doing a lot of that work. But otherwise, Amplitude is a completely separate, independent entity.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so Amplitude invests in all sorts of different healthcare
Mostly
stuff?
biotech, I would say.
Biotech.
We do technically have a mandate to invest in medical devices and digital health as well. Also AI and diagnostics. But most of our capital is dedicated to biotech.
So quick glance
Yep.
at the Canadian landscape for innovation.
Yep.
What are the top trends you're seeing in terms of if there are,
Mhm.
um, you know, areas of focus within that
Mhm.
that companies are being founded to solve, or is it across the map, different entrepreneurs tackling different problems?
I would say probably the second one. There's a lot of areas. Again, it really depends on the type of industry you're going into, and like biotech is very different than devices, and different than digital health. So, for example, like let's just take biotech. So, Canada does really well on the cell and gene therapy side. We have like the CCRM and NRC, and also like a company called Abcelera that was built out in Vancouver. You may not know about it, but they actually developed the first COVID antibody with a company called Eli Lilly.
Hmm.
They ended up doing really, really well because of that. And they ended up actually IPOing at the time. The IPO, their valuation, again, this was the craziness of 2020 and 2021. They had a $15 billion valuation. Yeah, and it was a deal we missed out on. So that's another topic for another day. So yeah. Anyway, they did really well, and Vancouver's done really well for cell and gene therapy. So there's a company called Zymerx that was based out of there on the sort of antibody side. There's a company called Precision Nanosystems that was based out of there as well. So that's a sort of a bigger hub in that direction. In Toronto, we have a really strong culture of research. Obviously, all the universities that are around
Mhm.
Toronto, but really especially on imaging. So there's a lot of really interesting imaging on the device side that's in and around Toronto. And then also on the digital side, what I find in Canada is that we have a lot of really early stage digital health entrepreneurs. So a lot of really interesting people, targeting interesting ideas. So, like, for example, you're seeing mental health startups everywhere. You're seeing, startups related to, AI in clinical trials, or, how to, process medical information quicker. So, for
Right.
example, if you're a doctor, if you are you able to, dictate faster, and like, you're able to
Oh
do
my
that.
God,
Okay.
everyone hates charting, right?
Exactly. Everybody hates charting. So to your point, so I think there's a lot of really interesting ideas, but I think the problem in Canada is you can't get scale
Yeah.
because the regulatory environment amongst each province is very difficult.
Yeah.
So trying to go across provinces is hard. And at the end of the day, you're just not going to get paid, right? And so the business model is really difficult because we're a public healthcare system.
How do
Um,
monopolies in Canada lock innovation out of implementation?
Ooh, that's a great question.
In your lens,
In
in
biotech. So a lot
exact.
of it is related to Health Canada and the way they operate, and also the reimbursement, right? So, for example, for me as a biotech investor, if I invest in a cancer drug at an early stage,
Mhm.
the goal of that drug, if it gets to market, is that I can sell it for $100 to $200,000 for a treatment in that an indication, because that's what the U.S. market is. The thing with Canada, because the money comes from the Canadian government, they're just not going to reimburse that, right? So we're going to use a lot of generic treatments like chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery, stuff that's been off patent, because we're just not going to pay for it. So
Hmm.
that's the thing that the Canadian healthcare system is, and it's just, again, it's just by design and incentives. Like, I'm very grateful that we get to go to the doctor and it doesn't cost us an arm and a leg, versus the U.S. is very different. But at the same time, on the venture and investor side and company side, the market's just not here in Canada. Like the way I
And
think
the
about it is just it's like being smaller than one state in the U.S., which is
Right.
like the scale is just completely different.
It's an interesting perspective there that
Mhm.
innovation finds markets, like businesses will try and find clients and customers and go where the market is,
Mhm.
which may take them out of their borders.
Absolutely.
Um, Especially in this space,
Yeah,
because if
you have to.
healthcare is so crucial for, advancing
Yeah.
humanity's.
Well, and I mean, the thing is just, it's like at the beginning, you almost have to, like the US market, you have to be in basically, more or less, just because of size and where it is.
Yeah.
The idea being that, 10, 15 years down the road, it's a real product that's really off patent. It will eventually come back to Canada and will help. And it's part of that.
But we have
Um,
no government infrastructure to help keep that kind of innovation at home and nurture it and replace a customer as the government, like procurement on this macro level.
Not on the biotech side. I think on the device side and the digital health side, yes, but
Okay.
it's just not the same scale, right? So for
Right.
example, like I'm looking at this opportunity that's a medical device, is a catheter that you can use during stroke treatment.
Mhm.
Really interesting company, really, really cool. And they're starting to sell in Canada, which is great. So you're actually seeing it in patients, and it's actually changing people's lives. Like there's a case that they did in London where, this person came in with a stroke. Within 10 minutes, they operated using their device, and she was able to walk home 2 days later and like has full function, which is unbelievable, especially as a physician.
For a new device.
For a new device, yeah. Which is incredible. But again, that cost of that treatment in Canada is, let's say, for argument's sake, $5,000 for that surgery.
Mhm.
In the US, that's $20,000. So the company, again, as an investor, and this is where sometimes I get sort of the paradox of what I invest in, because at the end of the day, I want treatments and outcomes to be better for patients. But fundamentally, my job as an investor is to return money to my investment and also to help companies scale and build and grow.
Mhm.
And in order to do that, you have to be in the bigger markets. You just can't be here, right?
Mhm.
So they could sell to every doctor in all over Canada this device, and yet if they go to one state and have every doctor in one state use it, they'll make it more money.
Right.
Plus, there's 50 other states that they can go after. So to me, that's the struggle that I think we have, and I think especially as healthcare entrepreneurs, is like you have to be geared towards the U.S. Unfortunately, it's just the way the world works, or at least my world works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely a macroeconomic problem and political problem to discuss in another episode.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I can talk about that for a long
Right.
time. Yeah. Absolutely.
We'll do one.
Yeah.
We'll
Let's
do
do it.
another
Absolutely.
episode of the StartWell Podcast.
Please. I would love to.
Hopefully a roundtable to do with this kind of, the health industry of
Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah, for
with
sure.
some,
Because there is a lot of innovation, I think, on the ground. There's a lot of people doing really cool things. It's just the scale of where I sit, because we're a VC.
Yeah.
And VC economics work is you put in 1 to make 10, ideally.
Right.
You just can't build that
100,
here,
you mean?
right? Exactly. Ideally. Very hard to get there, but yeah, in healthcare it is. But yeah, so that's also why it's kind of you have to be geared to kind of the US.
So I see the confliction, the confundation there of those identities that
Yeah,
you're navigating.
Yeah.
Doctor,
Investor,
investor, and
Yeah.
author.
and now author.
So we're
yeah.
sitting with these books.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing them to the studio and
No
giving
problem.
them.
Thank you for
gifting
this.
them to me.
Absolutely, no problem.
They will go in the StartWell library once I've read them.
I love that.
Okay, so what am I looking at?
Yeah, so there's 2 books there. So one of them is called Stolen Thoughts, which is a small black book. Yep. So that's actually a book of poetry. So very randomly, about a year ago, I started writing poetry, and I found I would always go back to a very specific format and style that I didn't see anybody else using. And so over the course of a year, whenever I had ideas, I kept writing and sort of taking track of it. And you can kind of see as you read through, it's like it kind of
repetition.
starts, with a repetition, and the idea of you start with an initial line and then kind of extend it out to see where you can take it. So that is the poetry book. It's a very new sort of part of my writing and my life. And then the other book that you have is the blue book called From Here to There. And that's honestly about exactly what we talked about today. It's about my sort of journey and how to change careers. And so the kind of first chapter starts off with everything I've kind of talked about, especially, a little bit more into the detail of how I left, the emotional journey, what was the process. And really the book is a guidebook for people that are trying to, find out what they want to do, how to shift careers, and also just like logistically. Because I think a lot of times is, theoretically I can talk to you about changing careers, but actually doing it and what are the steps and, how do you reach out to people? How do you set up a LinkedIn? How do you set up a resume? How do you interview? How do you do coffee chats? What do you ask from them? How do you like all of these steps? I find that there was no good resources
Right.
to do it,
Right.
because especially for young people. I mean, like there was no playbook. You know what I mean? Like when I left my career, like I had like left medicine to go to another thing. There was nothing. Like I had nothing there that was in front of me. And so genuinely, I wrote this for my younger self. Like I wrote this to give to me when, in medical school or in, university. And it's like, hey, like the way I think people, especially young people, is you go down one path and you feel like you're stuck.
Yeah.
And you feel like that's it and that there's nothing else you can do. And I think the goal of this book is to try to show people like that's not true.
Oh, it's literally you have things here, letters that say,
Literally.
"Dear younger."
Yeah. So
Anish.
the function of the book is each chapter has like the first part of the chapter is steps as to like how to change.
Yeah.
And the second part of the chapter is Dear Younger Anish. And it's like, here's the things I wish I knew when I was your age.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Anish, where can people find this book?
So Amazon's probably the best way to do. It's called From Here to There. You can just, if you type in From Here to There and Anish, it does come up. And yeah, it's the goal and design behind it is like, it's a very short book. It's about 100 pages. You can literally read in an afternoon. It's super easy to read. And I've gotten feedback from friends who have thought is really good. So I think anybody that's like, and it doesn't even have to be a young person. I think anybody that's looking to change careers or think about how to do it.
Yeah.
This is kind of a stepwise process, or one that at least has worked for me. And what's really cool is I remember, the genesis behind the book was actually during COVID. My sister was talking about, she was just graduating university. She's like, how do I apply for jobs? What do I do? And I was like, oh, I could write about that because like I remember doing it myself. And so I wrote a blog post called So You Want to Be a VC, geared towards like getting into specifically venture, but also a bit more broad. And it was like all the steps that worked. And I mean, what's really interesting is like, my sister and even my brother as well, who was thinking about leaving medicine at a different time, which is a whole other topic, was able to get interviews and talk to people across careers and industries and got to final stages because of just, being able to use some of the tips in this book. So it works, or it has for me, and it's worked for people in my life. So yeah, I just, that's why I kind of wrote it and wanted to give it to people as a resource to help them.
How did it feel writing and penning your thoughts and now being able to share those thoughts? Is this something that's going to continue, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I mean, this will be my life. I started writing 2018 when I left medicine. I've been doing it every day since. The other thing we didn't really talk about, but I started a blog a few years ago. So 2021, I kind of set up to start a goal of writing 100 blog posts in a year. I ended up writing 500 in 1 year, which was pretty nuts,
Yeah.
and just really loved it. And essentially, that's never stopped. And so I've been writing since that, like literally since 2018. I have about 850 blog posts now on my website. And so these are just functions of some of them,
Sure.
but I have a lot of other thoughts, ideas, things I've been writing about and still write about all the time. So this will be forever. And you'll see a lot more of, like, I think the next part of my life, or a big part of my life, is going to be, I think, media, and really scaling content, because I think, if you can teach people stuff that they don't see or hear, and do it in a way that, gives it to them in whatever they like, whether it's writing, audio, video, I think that's super valuable. And so I've just basically built this content base for the last 5 years. And so the next part, you'll see a lot more start to
I
come
love
out.
it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. It was
Hmm.
such a pleasure spending some time with you, Anish, and hearing
Thank
a little
you.
bit about your journey.
Please. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm
This was
excited
awesome.
to see where you go from here.
Yeah. It's super exciting. And but I would love to be back. And whenever you want to have a conversation, I'm always open to it.
For sure. And if you're
Yeah.
up for it, I
Yeah.
think listeners might like this. You want to
Yeah.
read one of your poems?
Absolutely. I'm happy to.
I stopped on this one because I
Okay.
think it's kind of compelling.
Okay.
And
Stop waiting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if you will,
Yeah.
definitely read it for us, and then you can just look in that camera.
Okay. Okay.
And
Let's start. Yeah. Okay, cool. Stop waiting. Stop waiting for the right time. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop waiting for someone to push you. Stop waiting for someone to show you the way. Stop waiting for someone to tell you you're doing a good job. Stop waiting for someone to pat you on the back. Stop waiting for the validation. Stop waiting for the praise. Stop waiting for the support. Stop waiting for the right time. Stop waiting for someone to pick you up. Stop waiting for when you feel ready. Stop waiting for people to like what you're doing. Stop waiting for the self-doubt in your mind to disappear. Stop waiting for tomorrow. Stop waiting. Go.
I like it.
Thank you.
I like that a lot. It was very
Yeah.
poignant, man.
Hmm.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Sir.
Thank you. This was awesome.
All
Thank you so much.
right.